complicated, you know, man. Like a dang old Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about that blue, red, man, then you get to one side and like messed up.
All right, before I welcome our prestigious guest, just want to remind you guys that this show is sponsored by Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. If you want to see the exact same workout that I use, so you can get just as big as burden, so to speak, well, you can check the link in the description to head over to JD's website, and there's a 20% off coupon if you use the code BEAVER. So head over there. But anyway, Patrick Casey, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on, Mr. Burden.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk with you. I was kind of joking around before we went live. I meant to have you on a long time ago, but the biggest obstacle to getting onto my show is my own inability to schedule more than anything else. But I'm glad to finally have you on, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad we were able to surmount that obstacle. Glad it wasn't too formidable.
Just about my own incompetence. But anyway, man, so I assume most people, know who you are. But if you could, for those who aren't familiar with you, could you kind of describe, who you are and what you do?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I've been involved in dissident politics since, I guess, late 2015. I was red pilled a little earlier than that, but toward the end of my time in college, with the 2016 election getting going, I got sucked into the dissident right, and I say that, I mean, it was a good thing, but yeah, I just kind of dove head first. And after college, I studied anthropology, and I was thinking about being an archaeologist because that's kind of what you do if you have a bachelor's in anthropology. And after doing anthropology, I had a few different internships. I had one at an archaeological center where you're doing lab work. I had another one out in the field, actually excavating and stuff. And I just realized it wasn't for me. So the point being is I've been involved in this stuff since around 2016, through the ups and downs of the offline and online dissident right. So these days, though, I've done activism and things of that nature before. But these days, I'm mostly focused on writing, and I have a YouTube channel. That's basically it. We'll see where if I were to go back to any point in time throughout the 5 to 6 years I've been involved in this stuff, I guess nearing 7 now. I would have never been able to predict where I would be the next year. So I'm saying that's just what I'm doing now. I have no idea where I'm going to be. This stuff is, if you're involved in it like 100% of the time, offline, face, name, you really have no idea where you're going. So, but that's a general overview.
So that's interesting because, obviously not on this specific episode, but you are one of the few guys that not only face fags, but name fags, right? To use the parlance of the internet.
Right.
So I'm curious, do you see a distinction between, the anons and the people who, use their real face and name? Like, what would you describe as the difference between those two types of people?
Yeah, I think typically there is a difference. There's definitely a need for both. There are probably pros and cons to both, but I'm generally very pro anon when it comes to the dissident right. Not just because that's how I started off, but I think there's a real energy and to the chaos of an online space. I remember I got red pilled basically through poll. I had gone on 4chan back in the day as millennials did, just because of the funny memes, which in retrospect probably weren't actually that funny. But it was the birthplace of so much internet culture. And when they added a board for politics, okay, I'll check it out. I'll look into it. And I just remember being shocked by what I was seeing. But I think I've been very high on the openness scale, so to speak, in terms of new ideas and theories and stuff. So I was definitely very open to all of that. But the point being is that there's a certain magic in spaces that are anonymous where I think it lends itself to a certain art of posting that, it's not like people face fags, so to speak, can't use their, can't create good stuff, obviously, but there is just something to everyone putting on a mask and participating in this space where you don't know the other people's identities. It just there's It's why, Truth Social and all of these other alt tech sites, most of them, they just don't have the magic that Twitter does. They're just not funny and exciting, right? The magic isn't there. So I would say that people have different roles to play, and the cause needs people who are going to be more active in the real world, who are going to be more agents of change in a maybe a more conventional sense, or even in a controversial sense. Even if you're a pretty controversial dissident figure, well, there's a need for people who are doing stuff in the real world. But for most people, spreading awareness of our ideas, of our thoughts, getting our takes out there is going to be an anonymous thing. So yeah, there are pros and cons to both. The cons with being a face fag is it becomes a career, and there are definitely some negative incentives, perverse incentives that exist with that. And these are things I try to keep in check, right? You got to remember it's more than just a career, and you shouldn't be there are all sorts of stuff, things that will get you clicks that maybe aren't in the best interest of the cause overall. So it can be difficult to strike a balance sometimes. But and with the non, sometimes it's easy to be sucked into an online world, and you kind of lose sight you lose touch with reality, so to speak. This is why people that are we call it LARPing, people who are demanding something that's probably never going to happen. Like people who are demanding, they're saying, give me galactic solar tradcath imperium, or give me nothing, or even edgier, weirder forms of ideology. And I think really just Anons should keep in mind that the need to be pragmatic in how these things manifest. And part of that pragmatism means for a whole class of people who are going to be operating at various places in the Overton window, right? I'm not, I don't work, on Capitol Hill or something of the sort. It's people who are going to have to hide their power levels to varying degrees and so forth. So I think just looking at it that way, is people having different roles to play in this is a very important way to do this, because it's very easy to get mixed up. And, if you're you're looking at a face fag. Why isn't he saying this? Why isn't he saying that? And, vice versa. You see it very often. Face fags will be like, well, I've got my face out here and I'm using my real name, and where's yours? And, we all obviously know the answers to that. So, I think there are just different dynamics at play and pros to cons, but I think our cause overall benefits from both.
So you spoke about how you've been in these spheres for a long time, and I'm a relative newcomer, but from my perspective, at least insofar as the radical internet right, the e-right, whatever you want to call this odd collection of people, it seems like there's kind of 3, maybe 4 eras. There is build up to Trump years, COVID, and then now this kind of weird place we're in. And so I'm curious, how would you say the scene has changed over time, and what do you think are the characteristics of this kind of like fourth age of the E-right, if you agree with my classification there?
Sure. Well, I'm not going to nitpick. I think I'm tempted to break it down into chapters that are roughly analogous to what's going on overall, but have more to do with what I was doing at the time. But I mean, I would say just generally with regard to, you ask anyone, there are going to be different ways of where you end this chapter and start the next one. So I'm not splitting hairs over that. When it comes to how the scene has changed, there's just this real energy and enthusiasm in 2016 that I've personally felt at times since, but it has been fairly limited. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that was the best of times and it's only going to go downhill from here. But it's important to keep in mind that these things ebb and flow, politics in particular. And, if you're a dissident, you're just used to getting punched in the face over and over. That could be personally, if you're involved in this stuff and you're getting, subpoenaed by Congress and kicked off of platforms and, just the general chaos of the dissident right. It can also be for the average person who's watching this, maybe participating on Twitter, watching streams, and cares very deeply about things, right? And I got involved in 2016, so many other people did as well. There was this real enthusiasm that lent itself pardon me, that led to a sense of larpiness. Again, you had people had these expectations that Trump was going to get elected and become Caesar, and the fact that he didn't meant that, we should just do away with Trump altogether, whatever. I understand there are critiques, there are varied opinions on Trump at this point. I'm generally, for pragmatic reasons and because I like the guy, pro-Trump, although I am under no illusions about, I just have very low expectations. But to get back to just how the scene's changed, that energy has largely gone, but it goes in cycles because there was a lot of energy in 2020 with just everything started popping off at once. You had COVID, then you had the summer of Floyd, so to speak, then you had the contested election. So a lot of this stuff does seem to be, it's not that nothing happens in between the election cycles, but it does seem like the election cycles, every time Trump decides he wants to run for office, run for re-election, things get pretty crazy. And by all appearances, he's doing it again. So I would say another thing, though, is activism seems to be less popular. The idea that, well, you take all this energy offline and channel it, online and channel it offline into a real world movement where everyone's showing their faces and eventually everyone, shows, is using their names. And I think the wiser wings of the dissident right haven't gotten that. And it's not really, or have gotten that, pardon me. It's not a dig at, anyone else who's doing activism out there. That stuff isn't really on my radar. But, if you back in 2016, there was a real push to get people to peacefully, get out in the streets. And I've been to all of the rallies and all of that. But people really I think there's a better understanding of how the system's immune response reacts. Now, lots of people haven't learned those lessons, but you have new people who come into the scene, and you have, I don't know. It's all over the place in terms of where people are at. But it also is less united. In 2016, the dissident right, there was a real sense of unity, and that is really not the case. But I would argue that's a good thing, because in order for us to succeed, I'm not going to specify, but there are a lot of strategies. There are a lot of things that if you're trying to get stuff done offline, if you're trying to, influence the bigger thing, which is populism, Trumpism, conservatism, whatever, which really should be our goal, one of the main ones, you can't be involved in. So the idea that anyone who agrees with the contents of the average poll, shitpost or something, all of that should be united in a movement that is totally at odds with, Trump and polite society, whatever that, hopefully I think a lot of people have understood that's not really, there doesn't seem to be as much of an interest in that. So, I mean, I could keep going on and on about how things have changed. People have come and gone, movements, organizations, subcultures, memes, right? Pepe, people used to post Pepes all the time. You don't really see much of that anymore. It's kind of funny how these memes have a life of their own. But yeah, that's kind of an overview of things. Like I said, I could go on for hours about how the scene has changed in, the 5 to 6 years. But I think that probably suffices for now.
There's an interesting history. One of the things that I have noticed a shift is it seems like post 2020, there's a lot more interest in parallelism, right? Like building things, not necessarily contra to the system, but outside of it. And I'm sure that that's been going on for a long time. Like that is a long running thread within the American right, certainly for a long time. But I'm sort of curious to see where that will go, because, and I'm sure a lot of these people as well as I have a lot of, daily interaction with what I consider like red state boomers, like the MAGA boomer types. And it's interesting because a lot of those people got a hard democracy red pill, and I'm not necessarily saying the boomer waffin's going to save us, but it is interesting to see that while it's certainly true that a lot of people didn't learn, so to speak, the lessons of the last presidential election, which is the most legitimate election, I should say. But nonetheless, it does seem like there's been kind of a pin placed in that idea that we can have our own version of the 1964 revolution, so to speak. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, there are people who buy into the left's mythology, and in a sense, it's understandable why people do, and that is because that is the dominant understanding of history that people have we've been propagandized with from a very young age. The idea that people organically came together and overthrew the shackles of the old pre-civil rights America, basically historic America, and through activism, through peaceful protest, through changing the culture, right? That's something that conservatives, even dissidents, love to talk about. And the reality, though, is when you go back and you study how civil rights happened, there had been a top-down revolution going back for some time. Pinpointing the exact beginning is kind of hard, but I mean, you could look at the Great Society with creating the welfare state and expanding the bureaucracy. I mean, that kind of laid the foundations for what we have now, that along with the civil rights state is you have this bloated bureaucracy that is in many senses unaccountable to people, right? This is not really democracy. There are plenty of critiques of democracy, but what we refer to as democracy now is, I think, Yarvin likes using the term oligarchy. I think that's fair. Just as long as you don't get carried away with the idea that it's, there's a time and place to talk about corporate, influence on all sorts of these things, and they should be critiqued when they're doing bad things. But it isn't as if Jeff Bezos is, and the CEOs are all getting together and plotting how to make the country woke. Now that stuff actually might happen, but that isn't the origin of this. And there are higher powers in society, in America in particular, than those CEOs. And I would argue that in many cases, those CEOs are going along with an agenda that they didn't basically come up with. So, yeah, you don't want to buy into the left's mythos. You don't want to misunderstand things. You don't want to think that in order to win, we just have to do what the left did. There's this type of cargo cult revolution that I want to go back real quick just to the oligarchy thing is, yes, don't think it's like the monocle man wearing, the monocled Monopoly man who's not necessarily running things. Again, I wouldn't deny, rich influences altogether. But when it comes to who's ruling over us, the oligarchy in terms of the rule of the few. And at the end of the day, it is the rule of the few. And Aristotle would say that oligarchy is when the few rule, but in their own best interests, or not in the public or the common good. And I think that's pretty close to what we have. So if we're defining oligarchy in that sense, I think that's a fair definition. But yes, we don't want to buy into the left's revolution myth, right? There was a top-down revolution that took place before. By the time the 60s happened, there was largely, though not entirely, a sympathetic elite. So, yeah, the idea that you're just going to protest your way out of this, right? I wouldn't rule out protests anytime, but I mean, I have very little interest in them. And I think 99% of the time, at best, they are at best, they get nothing done. At best, you're spinning your wheels. At worst, you end up in situations like Charlottesville in J6, which, obviously the mainstream media narratives about those events totally false, but it didn't exactly work out for the people involved. So you don't want to buy into the left's myth about how things change, right? Also, when it comes to, that goes into changing the culture. Oh, well, we just need to change the culture. We just need to podcast and win over hearts and minds, and then we win because we'll have enough people there, and then we change. Well, obviously, this stuff is important, getting the ideas out there, countering the lies of the regime. But what people need to understand is that oftentimes, and I think this is in AA's sphere, which I would put you, I don't know, I think you'd probably accept that. I don't think you'd object to that, but he does a very good job of reminding people that oftentimes, more often than not, maybe he would say always, culture is downstream from power. It's not like you just change the culture organically and then the power changes, although there's, maybe something to that sometimes in some situations. It's, oftentimes the laws change through elite, top-down revolution, and then the culture changes. So there are many reasons why you don't want to buy into the left's myth about the 60s, about how it changed. Absolutely not. You need elite support. And, you need to be asking yourself, if you're involved in political advocacy, are you attracting elites? Is this something that an elite would get behind? So if your whole message is that, capitalism is the enemy or something, well, okay, rich, influential people, a lot of successful people, upper middle class people probably aren't going to be too into that. So
one of the interesting fronts in the culture war right now, and this is connected to what you're saying, I'm not completely jumping track, so to speak, is the trans issue. Mm-hmm. And I'm genuinely curious how the mainstream right will handle that issue, because on one hand it seems like the base is red hot on this. It's an issue that inflames passion, specifically with the drag story time, the trans ideology, essentially like looking for access to children. But it seems like the structures of power, right? The actual GOP itself, when it comes to things like Miss MAGA or whatever her name was, his name, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be rude. I just actually don't know the proper term here. Or nonetheless, kind of the signaling towards like, oh, well, the desire to come towards some type of quote unquote synthesis on this issue. But do you think that this is another area in which, the right will be successfully pushed? Or do you think that this is close enough to the core of what, kind of like normal, Republican voting Americans value that it'll be kind of a bridge too far? What's your take on that?
Pardon me, if what is a bridge too far? If
the trans agenda is a bridge too far, or if it's another one in the series of kind of like conservative capitulations.
Right.
Sorry, I should have distilled that to a more.
No, it's totally fine. I'm just a little sleepy after a long day, I guess. But so I would say, yeah. I mean, look, there's obviously the joke, which really isn't a joke, about 20 years from now, maybe 10 years from now. There's going to be National Review will write an article titled "The Conservative Case for Transgenderism." Well, they've actually kind of already done that. And I saw there's an article I think they put out late last year, maybe it was early this year, that was along those lines. And then I was thinking, I kind of read through it. I was like, wait, I've seen them do this before, though. So it's like, you dig a little deeper. They've been doing that with this issue for a while. And yeah, you also see now there are forms of very effete, toothless opposition to transgenderism, where it's the drag queen stuff, where it's totally fine if people want to do that. Just, and then they oppose the low-hanging fruit of like the most egregious 1% of the trans agenda. And so I would argue that that's, in a sense, we're seeing the leftward shift before our eyes. It's really hard to tell where we're going to be. I would say if nothing changes, then yeah, we'll absolutely find ourselves in a situation where the conservative case for transgenderism is the dominant one. But I do think that transgender people are so uniquely horrifying to the average person, when the average conservative, that it's, especially when it comes to the kid. I don't see there being lots of ground ceded by the average conservative right now. And I don't know if I think it will be harder for that to be accepted than that it will be harder to accept that than the gay, some of like gay marriage or something. That's something that, a lot of people were opposed to. And I think a non-negligible, but probably not a majority of Republicans are opposed to at this point. But, the trans stuff is just so rooted in putting it in front of your kids' faces, right? And, that it really is the youth that is tuning out, so to speak, more often than older generations. I mean, we've seen so it is an issue that is basically inextricable from kids. Whereas with gay marriage, it's like, all right, well, these are, these two dudes are going to go get, the way it was viewed at the time, and maybe to some extent still is, oh, these dudes are going to go get married and, whatever, who cares? Obviously, there was a lot of opposition to it, but Yeah, I think for the foreseeable future, the trans agenda is going to be pretty opposed. Now it's I'm definitely against it. I just wouldn't want the conservative movement to be only about that. I mean, if you look at the numbers of the people crossing the border, I mean, it's record levels, hundreds of thousands of border encounters every month. 5 million since Biden got into office. I think the data roughly, according to FAIR, I think it's roughly half of those people make it into the country. That's extremely concerning. And we don't have to. Fortunately, we're not forced to pick and choose which. If you're going to create a one-issue nonprofit, then I guess you are. But for people who talk about this stuff, and even if you're running for office, you can talk about all these issues at the same time. The trans, talking to some friends of mine, some have pointed out that I think correctly that the trans stuff just gets more headlines. I mean, the border stuff does too, but it's just ongoing. You see the clips of a border invasion once. I've seen but the clips with the children being exposed to this stuff, the drag queen stuff. Yeah, it's we just don't want to lose sight of like the bigger picture, I would say. But yeah, I think conservatives for the foreseeable future will be holding the line, although, yeah, you never know, given the state of conservatism and the people who are responsible for steering the ship, right? The ceding ground to the left is always going to be the easiest option when the base isn't, at your throat over it. The base would be, in many cases, at the throat of their representatives, state, local, national, if they ceded ground on this issue. But, we'll see. We'll see where it goes.
So there's no denying, and I respect that you try to toe the line on YouTube, right? I'm in a similar boat. I'm not trying to set you up for something here, but it is objectively true that immigration is changing the face of America, and obviously with that comes a political change. And so I'm curious, what do you think will happen to the face and nature of American politics, not only as each individual like ethnic or racial bloc makes up a smaller percentage of the whole, and also as kind of our traditional balance of groups changes. So for instance, what I mean in that is that it used to be, right, that there were, there was a relatively homogenous WASP vote, an ethnic white vote, and then a black vote, right? Now, the black population in the U.S. has stayed relatively the same. The white one has declined. We've had more immigration from all over the world. And so that's produced smaller and less, quote unquote, unified blocks. So I'm curious, what trends do you think will emerge over the next decades should kind of immigration proceed at the current pace?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I guess these conservative Hispanics are going to come over and inaugurate an American renaissance, a renaissance of conservative values in America. Joel Berry, a managing editor of the Babylon Bee, is under that impression, and apparently others. People were liking and retweeting that. Obviously, no one I follow, but yeah, the obvious answer here is that. Sam Francis said it best. Look, when new populations come into a country, any form of representative government, well, once they come over in large enough numbers, they're going to be seen as they're going to change the political institutions, because political institutions, in the hopes of winning them over, will align with them. Will change themselves in order to accommodate them, right? And I'm obviously opposed to. I support a total, net negative or net zero immigration platform at this point. But at the same time, okay, so any country that if you were in a period of accepting immigrants and you wanted to keep doing it, you would want immigrants to go along with what you're about, not change yourself to be more like the immigrants and adopt their values. And I mean, that's really what's happened. So the issue, though, you see this with the GOP, where they say many times, and Con Inc. as well, many people will say, well, we just can't. We have to win over these immigrants, and by advocating against immigration, advocating for immigration restriction, we're not going to be able to win them over. But the reality is, I mean, Trump, he got a few more points. I don't know, 5, 6, whatever. More points of the Hispanic vote than, I think from 2016 to 2020. And in 2016, I think I don't remember the exact numbers that that Romney got, but maybe a few points higher. But the point is that there's going to increasingly be this desire to make the Republican Party, it's part of the leftward shift, right? It's the desire to make the party more suitable for people from the third world. And we should just say it very clearly right now that, social conservatism is important, right? Traditional values, religion, traditional conceptions of sexuality, all of these things. Yes, of course. But the idea that you're just going to be able to have kind of like a third world version of that, the idea that that's desirable, let alone achievable, is utterly ridiculous, And that's why the immigration restriction, it's not the only issue, but it's a big one. It's a big one. And, every so often I'll see on Twitter people say, well, that battle's been lost, even though it was important. So we need to focus on, banning Drag Queen Story Hour at the state and the local level. Well, they're not mutually exclusive, and the battle hasn't been lost. And the thing with immigration as well is when you have that as like your central idea, you can work so many other things in there when that's the focus. I mean, that's why so many of us got red pilled through Trump. This is the guy talking about building a wall. Well, that raises so many questions. Well, why build the wall? Okay, wow. So people are, that can lead to group differences. That can lead to IQ stuff. That can lead to all of the studies that have been done on ethnic diversity. That can lead to so many things. So it's a very good issue to have at the center metapolitically. And of course, it's something that you want to achieve, have action on at the policy level, but even just culturally, having people thinking about that gets them thinking about, identity and what makes a good country. Is it open borders for everyone? Is that going to work out? Can you have it? No. And there are tribal realities, anthropological dimensions to man that are denied by the establishment, by the people in charge now. And, again, one of the biggest roles that the dissident right can play is to repeatedly and habitually just, whenever you see these takes out there, just push back against them. No, people are not interchangeable, right? There is a tribal dimension. Now, how you apply that is different, right? Some people would take that and say, okay, let's kick all people who aren't like WASPs out of the country. Maybe the Irish would be too much at that point. And maybe I am a bit biased in that regard. I would say that's taking it too far. But,
Wait, Patrick.
Yeah.
Are you Irish?
I am.
Sorry. I had to cancel the show. I'm just joking, man. Continue on.
It's over. Yes. Anyways, I don't even know where to go from there. The Hibernophobia here is.
Sorry, I realized I just put a hard stop. And that's a gag that will transfer awfully to the audio podcast.
Have you seen those old memes they did where it's 4chan memes about the elders of high? I see Gio in chat as a certified old head. I'm sure he's seen those, but it's like the elders of. It's like playing off of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, but it's about the Irish, and it's
like the schizograph of all the Irish
these
that control the world.
And they have leprechauns photoshopped in, and they're showing Irish have done pretty well for ourselves here over in America. So,
and I do think that there is
telling us he has seen those. I'm gonna have to revisit those. Those are pretty good, and it's all real, by the way. Yeah, you've there's nothing you can do to stop us. So.
Well, I mean, fair enough, I guess, right? The Irish do control the world. But there's something that I have been interested in watching, right? Which is that every once in a while you see one of these stories from particularly diverse areas of the Blue Coasts, right? Like LA County or something. And it's these bizarre inter-party conflicts that seem to make almost no sense in kind of a broader American context, right? Because it'll be like Democrat mayor calls Democrat, representative racist. and you'll look into it, and it'll be essentially like inter POC knife fights, right? And you'll find out that, wait a minute, like that was a Dominican, or, someone from the Dominican Republic, not a monk. And then, the other person will be from some other, like or some other ethnic group, which from a census perspective is the same. And to me, I think that is kind of a portal into our future, right? Is that as we diversify and as we become stronger, the party conflict will not necessarily be Republican and Democrat. It will essentially be intra-Democrat, as the Democrat Party becomes kind of like the party of power even more explicitly. And I don't know, maybe that's my own schizo theory, but it's a trend that I've noticed going forward.
Yeah, I mean, at the state level, yeah. In many cases where it's just such a blue area, it's going to be internecine Democratic feuding, basically. Yeah, I think that's the case. I mean, I don't see the GOP really going anywhere. I think the GOP has some real issues at the moment with winning elections. The fact, without getting into midterm analysis, I know people probably talked about that at length and heard about it at length back in November, but the GOP does have problems, but it's not going anywhere. There's still too much of the country that is not fully on board with the direction the left's going in. There are too many white people, frankly. But the GOP does have some real issues. I mean, it's with white, college educated, like suburbanites, the professional class. I'm pretty sure Trump won in 2016, whites with college degrees. But now if you log into right-wing Twitter, it's all about, well, not all about, but a lot about how the urbanite needs to be crushed and, don't go to college, get out of the cities. And some of this stuff is not bad advice, depending on the context or something of the sort. But, and people on both sides, can be guilty of taking it too far. But, yeah, I don't know. I think the GOP isn't going anywhere. The question going forward is, what the hell is the GOP going to look like without Trump? When people talk about Trumpism without Trump, there can be no Trumpism without Trump, no populism without Trump. I don't really like the populism word at this point. You could maybe credit some of that to AA, but I think more my own misgivings with the people who like really latched on to that term, especially here in DC. The people for whom 2016 was all about trade policy and things of that nature. We just need to, bring steel manufacturing back, and then, black people are gonna, be less likely to murder you or so, stuff like that. It's like, okay, well, I'm fine with protectionism. Sure, I support that generally, maybe not in every instance, but stuff like steel, sure, but that isn't gonna say reverse American decline. So, but there, with the whole Trumpism without Trump, there eventually is, unless people are banking on Trump becoming the God Emperor, president for life, even then, the guy's not going to live forever. So you would have to get into Warhammer 40K. Well, what if we extended his life indefinitely and he actually becomes the God Emperor, right? Maybe at that point, then there wouldn't be Trumpism. There wouldn't be the need for it because Trump will just live forever as the supreme dictator. But barring that possibility, which is pretty low, hate to say, there's gonna have to be someone or some end or something after Trump, and the question is, what is that going to be? And I don't think there's a really good answer for that yet. I mean, DeSantis, he does good things. I think it seems like he's gonna challenge Trump, and I don't think that's gonna play out well for him long term. But I don't know where you want to go from there. If you had we could take that in all sorts of other directions if you had, other questions you want to ask.
So the one thing that I think is interesting about the Republican Party and college-educated whites is that as someone who very recently exited higher ed, right? The amount of status coding that being left-wing carries in university is insane. Now, I will say one of the advantages to that is that it has become harder and harder to be not even a right-winger, but just a normal white guy and be a leftist on campus. Like that is a more and more hostile environment to you, which is part of the reason I think you've seen such an intense split between the sexes when it comes to party affiliation. Obviously, I'm not a big Republican Party guy, but it is just kind of an interesting note. And as to your point about, what comes after Trump, I agree. It seems like an open question, because if you held a gun to my head and said, who would you rather have in power, Trump or DeSantis? I'd probably go with DeSantis just off his track record. That doesn't necessarily think that I think he's the silver bullet. I think he's going to even do all that much. But I will say it does sort of seem like for all of DeSantis is sort of the mirror image of Trump in a way, and that Trump he tends towards speaking more than he actually accomplishes, right? Not to say that he didn't do anything, but he was more of a talker than anything else. Whereas DeSantis seems to just do things, and he's not the most charismatic guy in the world. He's not particularly interesting, but at least within his kind of like limited walled garden, he's an effective mover. And so I think that makes him a good governor. I don't think that makes him a particularly attractive presidential candidate, but Who knows? I could be wrong. It sounds like you disagree with me, though.
I was winding up a very hefty counter signal, but that caveat there at the end saved you from what would have been a very you wouldn't have been able to recover from what I was going to say. No, I mean, I generally agree. I'm not DeSantis over Trump, but I understand what you're saying. You did kind of. Yeah, the caveat at the end, I think is fair. Look, it's so much easier to get stuff done as the governor of Florida than it is to get stuff done as the president of the United States. I mean, the federal bureaucracy. I'm sure there's state level bureaucracy that, as a governor, you have to contend with. And, you have to deal with the feds as well of course. But when it comes to, you're really in the belly of the beast if you're, 10 minutes away from where I live, if you're in the White House in D.C. And so that's an important caveat. You drew attention to that. I see a lot of, I have friends who generally lean DeSantis. The overwhelming majority are pro-Trump, even if they have their reservations about Trump. Some of them might even be in the chat right now. But I think what I would say there is, with regard to DeSantis versus Trump, I think I already said earlier that I'm still on Team Trump, but I think there's just a bigger problem. Yarvin did an interesting show with Aaron. I don't know how many. I think he's only been on once, but that's at the very least it would have been the more recent one that he did. And he was bashing DeSantis pretty heavily, which I kind of enjoyed because, he's involved in the NatCon scene to some degree with, Hazoni and some of these types. And those guys are all pretty heavily DeSantis from what I've gathered. Maybe not all of them, but that scene, like the national conservative DC populist scene is definitely leans more DeSantis. So the fact that he's, goes to their conferences and pals around with them, that doesn't mean he's necessarily like intimately involved in whatever operation they have. The fact that he's, willing to go on a Blaze podcast and just trash DeSantis for an hour or two, and not uncharitably, was I thought that was very interesting. So, but one of his main points is like the DeSantis, and this is a recurring theme in Yarvin's work, and I think whatever disagreements you have with Lord Yarvin himself, with Mencius Moldbug, this is a very important theme to take away from his work, and that's, you don't want to half-ass a coup, right? And it's a paraphrase from an actual quote from a French revolutionary, 18th century French revolutionary. You don't want to half-ass a coup, and the reason why is because you're getting the worst of both worlds. You're challenging power. You're suffering the consequences of antagonizing a more powerful entity, and you're not getting anything out of it. And if you look at a lot of what DeSantis, it's like, well, how serious are you about taking power? And I think that's really the issue with, honestly, both Trump and DeSantis. There's a lot of bluster about how, I'm going to smash the establishment. We're going to, you're sending messages to the most powerful people that you're going to go in there and you're going to crush them. You're going to crush them. Okay, so of course the federal bureaucracy before Donald Trump in 2016 is gearing up to deal with them, right? With the Mueller investigation, with the FBI, just ambushes of General Flynn and others, just everything, right? And if Trump had, obviously he wouldn't have probably gotten elected if he was just saying, I love the federal bureaucrats, I just want to lower taxes, right? So I'm not saying there's like anything necessarily wrong with it, but that was back then. Now, knowing what we know, it's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not necessarily against. Garvin put up the rape seduction dichotomy, whereas Garvin's like, well, we must seduce the elites, the elves. We need to turn the elves into the dark elves, right? And you silly hobbits, you stay away, stay in the Shire, right? That kind of stuff. But he's not very he's not quite that condescending when he talks about that. But I think it's important to keep in mind with Trump and anyone who's going into the White House who's saying like, we're going to smash the bureaucracy, we're going to get rid of. Well, you damn well better do it. You would damn well better do it, and you would damn well better not half-ass it. That's just the thing. And if you go back to 2020, yeah, Yarvin's analysis was right. Don't go fishing at the Rubicon. You either cross it or you stay the hell away. And again, yeah, sure, I'll vote for Trump again or whatever else, but I don't really know what we're thinking and it's the same with DeSantis, which is interesting. Whatever issues you take with DeSantis or Trump or whatever else, it's the same kind of strategy. Is it like, are you actually willing to take this all the way? And do you even know what that looks like? So these are the questions that need to be asked. And I think there's a lot of publicity stunts that is involved with stuff like this, like sending the migrants. I mean, that was something that it was kind of funny. It was a funny troll, but okay, at the end of the day, DeSantis is shipping migrants in many cases closer to where they want to be. And the places he's shipping them to, like Martha's Vineyard, they have like a religious experience that unites them, quasi-religious, I should say, and unites them and solidifies their views. Those people, that is, caring for those migrants made them like 1,000 times more liberal. And at the end of the day, and then they got like sued over it, and it's like, okay, well, this is, it's stuff that like looks good for when you're running for office or running for re-election. But it actually like really pisses off the establishment, and it unites the other side and, solidifies it in your mind. Now, Yarvin takes it down some roads where I don't know when we win. I don't know if it's going to be exactly like this, right? Yarvin, the idea that you can just seduce the elites and then you'll find yourself in power. I don't really know. We don't know how we're going to win, but I think that, if you just dial it down a little bit, you boil it down to, okay, Yarvin is trying to win over disaffected liberals. Well, okay, that his strategy is good at doing that. Whether or not that's going to be the way that we cross the finish line, I don't know. At the very least, you have to just account for the fact that the establishment is far more powerful. And if you're planning on challenging them enough to, get elected and then you're just going to hang out, well, they're still going to go after you. So don't half-ass coups. Don't go fishing at the Rubicon. And, we need to be very critical when it comes to people who want our votes, who want our money, of, the things they're doing. Are these publicity stunts? Are you just poking the establishment in the eye? Do you actually have a plan for how to take power? So that's, there are many other issues with that the Republican Party faces and, the future, Trump, DeSantis, whatever. But that really remains like a big one. A lot of it's just talking about how you're going to, destroy the people in charge, and then you don't know how you're going to do it. Once you get in there, you're probably not going to do it. And that's the same thing with DeSantis. It's like he would probably dismantle some of the woke bureaucracy, like somewhat, but there's no way that guy's going to be more radical than Trump with challenging the establishment. It's DeSantis, okay? It's Ron DeSantis, who, were it not for Trump, would not be saying any of the things he's saying now. I'm not saying that he necessarily doesn't believe in any of it. But like every Republican politician, whether they're aligned with Trump or not aligned with Trump, is operating within a paradigm Trump established in 2016. So, I mean, I could ramble about this particular subject for hours. I'll leave it there. But
no, it's fascinating because I don't have a finger on the pulse of Republican Party politics, right? I think I would vote for Trump for his third term only for the statistical aberration of it. to be the one person in America who didn't vote for him the first 2 times and then did for the third. Again, I guess I didn't vote for anyone for president, so that's so we do have one super chat, and this is an interesting, related question from Cordy's7. How do we get better at taking advantage of crises? Every time something happens, the regime gets W. I asked AA this question the other night, and he said it's prerogative. It's the prerogative of power to act. What do? Do you have any thoughts on that, Patrick?
Sure. I mean, it depends on who we is. People who try to steer the discourse on Twitter, people who might be listening who are DC politicos, and or is it the right overall? Like, what should we be telling, conservatives? What should Trump be doing? It all depends. But look, when you have power, you obviously have far more of an ability to set the narrative, to frame things, and whatever else. I think the goal is always just getting power. Whatever power you have, use it to get more power. That's another Garvinism. So I'm not, I've got to be careful with my attributions here. But yeah, I would just say that we should just be focused on getting power in whatever it was, state, local, whatever. If it's influence, if it's, power comes in many forms. But the right and the right-wing people need to have more power. And, without that, you can't really take advantage of a crisis. So I would just kind of bring it back to the prerequisite for taking advantage of a crisis, and that is power. So, there are lots of people who listen to podcasts like this who, have actual political influence, right? They're not, I don't know, the right-wing equivalent of George Soros or whatever else, but younger guys who have influential jobs who are trying to make a difference. And, that's just kind of the case.
So yeah, and my advice would kind of mirror yours, which it depends on your station in life. If you're one of these, and I'm sure there, I have a large contingent, because I hear from all the time, of base truckers. For you, like if you have a normal job, and I just use trucker as an example because I hear from them all the time, you should probably not do anything. And I don't mean that in a prerogative way. I just mean or in a derogatory way. I just mean that what's the last time normal people tried to do something? How did it end up for them? Well, most of them are still in jail, right? Don't do that. That doesn't help anyone. But if you are in a position of influence, act accordingly. So I guess my big quibble would be with the term "we." One thing I would say is there are crises that are within the kind of normal walk of human existence, right? Like a tornado hits Mississippi, right? Which is awful. It's bad. It shouldn't have happened. But that's not necessarily an explicitly political crisis, right? It is sort of a fact of human existence, tragic though it may be. There's not really much to do then, unless it's, your community, in which case, obviously, rebuild. But if there is a failure of the regime, for instance, something like, Katrina, something like, trying to think of other, the East Palestine, something like that. There's a failure there. Then in that case, make all of the political hay you can. And one other thing, just a piece of advice for how you think of these things, how you express your opinions to others, is don't shy away from moral language, because I think oftentimes on the broader right we tend towards kind of pushing up the sunglasses, or pushing up the thick rimmed glasses, going full Ben Shapiro mode, and bringing out facts and figures. And to be honest, that dries people, or that makes people's eyes roll back in their head. Avoid that. But when there is a legitimate moral failing that is very clearly one, I think that is a depending on your situation in life, that is a boon. And Cordy says low level but rising bureaucrat in a blue city. In which case, you know what, man? Why are you using Canadian dollars? That seems like a little bit of a scam to get longer super chats. But I would say bide your time, and obviously don't compromise your position. But if you're in a position of influence, use it by all means. I feel like
what's the origin of the beaver emoji? I remember when I had you on, there were some beaver.
There are beavers in chat. Are you familiar?
Is there a beaver emoji on?
There is on normal keyboards. On the Android and Apple there is. Okay. But are you familiar with the Twitter poster Cody Browning? Well, regardless, he has a funny
I
Twitter account where
recognize him, but nothing comes to mind though.
he posts memes, and there was a video of, and it was just a stupid animal video, right? Of a beaver building a dam in captivity. It was a domesticated beaver, and it was like bringing its toys and making a dam. And they were making this documentary where it was talking about like, oh yeah, even in captivity, you can't stop a beaver building. And so it kind of became a joke from that. There was a bunch of beaver posting going on, and then the little logo in the top right, in the midst of a furious round of beaver shit posting, I drew that in Microsoft Paint, and it just is like a little PNG, and started adding it to all different types of historical photos, kind of like the oh wow, this would be a funnier reference if I could remember the punchline to this joke. Point is, and so it's sort of grown, and that's now what my community calls itself, right? The Beaver Gang. And so if there's ever a raid with a bunch of beavers, it's because I
know
set
who
a
to
bunch
blame.
of online
I know who to blame.
And also,
some trees in my front yard are suspiciously gnawed over the course of this interview. I know who to take issue with. No, that's cool. Yeah.
And then Lisa is bringing up something else in chat. There was a video from the Ukraine conflict of a beaver chasing around a bunch of Ukrainian soldiers, which of course also became a massive, just another way to extend this silly meme, right?
Putin's secret weapon right there. Yeah.
But anyway, man, we are coming up on time. So if people want to hear more of your work, where can they find you?
Sure. It looks like you put the link tree there. So, in case people were too lazy to click into the link tree, you also put my YouTube and my Twitter. I appreciate that. Yeah, those are the best places to find me. Those are the two most important links. If people watching live or after the fact want to keep up with me, I would go to my YouTube channel. I have had Jay Burden on. I'll have to have him on again in the future. And follow me on Twitter, all that good stuff. Tomorrow, that is going to be Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm having the Potentialist and Ryan Turnipseed, both of whom, without even having to check, I'm sure you've had on your show.
Oh yeah, 100%. They're both returning guests.
I figured, yeah. So we're going to be talking probably about the shooting in Nashville and maybe a few other news items, but that seems to be the talk of the town. Unfortunately, very tragic situation. But yeah, if people want to follow me there, that would be a place to do it.
And I'll be sure to be in chat for that, because that is an all-star cast.
Hey, you better.
As far as my links, yeah, thanks, Patrick. As far as my stuff, you guys know where to find me. This show is available on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you listen to audio shows, and also on YouTube, Odyssey. And I do encourage people to head over to the audio only stream. I'm really close to breaking 10K downloads this month, which has no other significance other than the fact that it is a pleasing round number and it activates my monkey brain. So I'd appreciate if you guys would check that out. And if you want to support the channel, you can either do that by checking out our sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. See, look, I can say that without saying Axio. And also you can support us more directly. In exchange for a little bit of money, you get access to pre-recorded episodes a little bit early. And I'll tell you, if you support us, we have an episode coming up. It'll actually be dropped tonight for supporters with Bennett's Phylactery, the guy who runs Exit Group. And that was a really interesting episode. And if you pay me a little bit, you get to read it early. And anyway, thank you so much, Patrick, for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It was a great discussion.
And for you guys at home, remember, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.